My name is Haningrum Eka Putri Rahayu, and as a research intern to the ASEAN Climate Change and Energy Project, I will be the master of ceremony for today's event. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I would like to also extend a warm welcome to our speaker of the day, Ms. Jiahui Chu from the Yusof Ishak Institute, who will be sharing insights from her academic paper titled Examining Climate Ambition Enhancement in ASEAN Countries' Nationally Determined Contributions. Today is the first series of the recurring ARNECC paper talks, in which it will be held on the fourth Wednesday of each month. And before we start the main agenda, I would like to introduce ARNECC to you. ARNECC, or short for the ASEAN Researchers Network on Energy and Climate Change, is an academic collective established by the ASEAN Center for Energy. An ARNECC paper talk, in which we are in today, is part of the perks of being registered as an ARNECC member. So if you would love to explore and experience all the benefits of being an ARNECC member, please find the link of registration to be one, in which it will be sent to the chat box by our team. Moving on, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the day, which is Ms. Indira Pradnyaswari. Ms. Indira is currently a research analyst of ACCEPT and MPP for the ASEAN Center for Energy. And for the next 35 minutes, she will be moderating the session and will be interacting with the speaker. Later on, when the session is ongoing and you have any questions, please send the questions on the Q&A box below. And now, before we start, Ms. Indira will lead this afternoon's discussion as well as introduce our speaker's credentials. So, without further ado, I'd like to pass over the stage to Ms. Indira. Ms. Indira, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Putri, for the kind introduction. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to ARNECC Paper Talks. And this year, we will have more discussion about the NDC series. For your information, ARNECC Paper Talks, we held it every month, where in 2024, we held it for 10 months and with the theme of Net Zero series. And this time, aligning with the submission of the nationally determined contributions in 2025, we are exploring more on the NDC progress and also action plan that is proposed by all the ASEAN member states. So this year will be the NDC year, and let's explore more about the NDCs for the ASEAN member states. Today with me, I'm with Miss Jiahui. So Miss Jiahui is a research officer in the climate change and in Southeast Asia program at the ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute. She was graduated from the NUS, National University of Singapore, majoring in environmental studies. And she's responsible, and also her research interests are in climate ambition through the study of ASEAN countries' NDCs, climate finance flows, methane emissions and abatement, and urban ecosystem services. She is also a co-author of the annual Southeast Asia Climate Outlook Survey Reports 2020-2024. So, hi, Jiahui, can you hear me?
Hello, yes, hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Great to hear that. So, are you ready to present your material?
Yep, sure.
Okay, so everyone, please welcome Ms. Jiahui. So, Ms. Jiahui, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Indira. Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen. Okay. All right, can you see my full screen?
Yes, we can see you full screen.
Okay, great. Thanks, Indira, and hi everyone. My name is Jiahui. I'm a research officer at the Climate Change in Southeast Asia program at the ISEAS-Yusof Ishak Institute. We are a think tank based in Singapore, and at our program, we are focusing on climate change issues, specifically in the Southeast Asia context, and we also focus on three main topics: energy transition, climate governance, and agriculture, land use change, and forestry. So today we're going to be looking into more of climate governance aspects, and I'll be presenting on my paper on enhancing nationally determined contributions ambitions in ASEAN. So just to start with some background on NDCs, NDCs are basically national climate commitments that are declared by parties, and they submit them under the Paris Agreement. So as you see in the name, every party is free to decide what their climate commitments are based on their national capacities and circumstances. And this is aligned with it's in the spirit of the common but differentiated responsibilities, which is basically an idea that says every country has a common responsibility to take climate action, but what that contribution looks like will be different for every country. And so for the NDCs, each country decides on what they choose to commit to. But at the same time, we know that as a global community, we need to really show enough climate ambition in order to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And we know that our collective ambition in our NDCs at the moment is still not enough to reach that 1.5 degree target. So it's really crucial for us to think of ways to facilitate countries strengthening their climate ambition through their NDCs to see how we can get closer to these targets. So this is a bit about how NDCs work. So under the Paris Agreement, every party is required to submit their NDC, a new NDC every 5 years, and every new NDC needs to show a progression or an increase in ambition compared to the previous one. So the first NDCs, NDC 1.0 or the intended NDCs, they were submitted in the lead up to the Paris Agreement or just shortly after the Paris Agreement was signed. And in 2020 and 2021, this was the deadline for the NDC 2.0, where countries were expected to submit their revised NDC with strengthened ambitions. So for most of our ASEAN countries, all of them have actually submitted at least up to this NDC 2.0 here. But after COP26, which was, it took place in 2021, there was a call for all parties to revisit and strengthen their latest NDC because there were findings that current NDCs were not enough to meet the 1.5 degree targets, and they really urged all parties to resubmit their NDCs, although it wasn't actually the official deadline yet. And so we'll see that a few countries actually responded to this call to strengthen their NDCs, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. And this year, 2025, is the deadline for the NDC 3.0. And so far, not many parties have submitted their NDC 3.0, unfortunately. I think about only 20 out of 195 parties have submitted it so far, but hopefully we'll see more countries submitting it before COP this year. Okay, so where are we at now in terms of our current ambition from all of the NDCs globally? So every year, the UNFCCC Secretariat will consolidate all of the latest NDCs from all parties, and they will estimate the total amount of emissions reductions that will be achieved if all of these NDCs are fully met, all of the targets are met. So from the latest 2024 report, we can see that globally, if all countries meet their NDC targets, we will have an 8.6 reduction of emissions by 2030. So we can see from here that there is still quite a significant gap, because if you look at projections by the IPCC, if we want to stay on track to a 1.5 degree scenario, we actually are looking at a 43% reduction in global emissions by 2030. So if you compare that with what our current targets are showing, it's kind of a pretty big ambition gap. Yeah. So yeah, it's really crucial to help countries enhance their ambition, and this is what our paper is sort of looking at right now. Okay, so zooming into ASEAN, this is a summary of the NDCs that all of the ASEAN countries have submitted so far. So like I mentioned, all of the 10 countries have already submitted up to NDC 2.0 as of 2021. And then after COP26, when there was a call for countries to revisit and strengthen their NDCs, 4 ASEAN countries actually responded to this call and resubmitted a new NDC in around 2022. So Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam revised their NDCs. And then this year, the NDC 3.0 is due, and so far Singapore is the only ASEAN country to have submitted its NDC, as far as I know. Okay. So going into the method of our paper, how do we go about assessing how countries enhance ambition in their NDC? So because the NDC is something that every country can decide on its own, this can lead to a wide variety of different targets and formats. So for example, they could have different baseline years, different target years, and different coverage. And so it's difficult to kind of make a fair comparison between different countries' NDCs. So this is not what our paper intends to do. Our paper just intends to look at individual countries and compare their latest NDC against their previous NDC to see how they have increased ambition and maybe potentially identify ways that they could further increase ambition for the next round of NDCs. So in our paper here, we've defined ambition enhancement as commitments or plans that raise the country's contribution to emissions reduction or strengthen accountability and clarity on its strategy for emissions reductions. So we think that ambition can be more than just, the economy-wide target that makes the headlines. There's actually more to the NDC that can show the country's ambition. And so here we have divided them into 4 different categories. 2 of these categories are at the economy-wide level, and then 2 of these categories are at the sector or the subsector level. So category 1 refers to the ways in which the country can enhance the economy-wide greenhouse gas target. Category 2 looks at coverage. So what is the scope of economic activities that the country is including in its NDC? In terms of the greenhouse gases that it will be monitoring, as well as which sectors it will be taking action in. And then category 3 and 4 refer to sector-based non-greenhouse gas targets and actions. For example, renewable energy targets or energy policies. And then these can add clarity and commitments in how countries plan to achieve their overall economy-wide target. And for some countries, if they don't have an economy-wide target, this could be their main avenue of showing their country's climate ambition. Okay, moving on. So going into our results here, if we look at category 1, which is on the economy-wide targets, most ASEAN countries' economy-wide targets are in the form of reducing emissions by a certain percentage compared to their projected emissions under a business-as-usual scenario. So they have predicted what their level of emissions will be under business-as-usual by 2030, and they will aim to have their actual emissions come under that. So we've summarized most of them in a chart here, and we can see that there is a progression across from older to new NDCs. So the blue is the NDC 1.0, purple is NDC 2.0, and then pink for the countries that have them is the COP26 Revisit NDC. And then over here we have unconditional and conditional targets. So what that means is unconditional targets are what the country plans to achieve using their own domestic resources. And conditional targets are targets that the country says that they will require international assistance to achieve, whether it's through financial resources or technology transfer or the sharing of expertise and capacity building. So let's see, we can go through each country here. So for let's say for Brunei and Laos, you can see that there's only a purple bar here. There's no blue bar, and that's because both of them initially had no economy-wide target. So the economy-wide target for the NDC 2.0 is a new one. And for Myanmar over here, there's no bar because so far it has not set an economy-wide greenhouse gas target. It only has sectoral targets. And if you look at the Philippines and Malaysia, both of them have submitted NDC 1.0 and 2.0, and they have shown a slight increase in the economy-wide target from the first to the second one. And in addition to that, the Philippines has added an unconditional target. Malaysia has removed its Malaysia has removed its conditional target. So in the NDC 2.0, it only has one unconditional target, which is based on emissions intensity. And another group here that I want to put together is Indonesia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So if you look at them, they they don't have a purple bar either, or it's a very small purple bar. And that's because for these countries, they made little to no changes from their NDC 1 to the NDC 2.0. But in their COP26 revisit, there were actually significant increases, a significant strengthening of their economy-wide target. So for Vietnam, it has increased its conditional target to 43.5%. Indonesia has increased it to 43.2%. And then also Thailand has increased both the conditional and unconditional targets quite significantly as well. Okay, so these two slides, these next two slides are just adding more detail to the economy-wide targets. So these are the specific targets that they have set. I've put yellow highlights on the countries that have made at least a marginal increase in their economy-wide target. So we can see that Cambodia's target has significantly increased from about 27% in the NDC 1.0 to now 41.7% in the NDC 2.0. And also Malaysia's target here, like I mentioned before, it increased from 35% to 45%. But I want to note that this is a different format of target from most of the ASEAN countries. It is in the form of carbon intensity based on GDP. So it's not based on absolute emissions. And then over here, I also just want to point out that Singapore has a slightly different target format as well. So it's not, Singapore's target is not based on the business as usual scenario. It is just a quantitative absolute emissions target. So from the previous NDC, it has set a target of limiting emissions to 60 million tons by 2030. And in the NDC 3.0, which it just submitted this year, it has set a new 2035 target to further decrease emissions to between 45 to 50 million tons by 2035. Yeah. So those are the ones that are a little bit different. Okay, so moving on to category 2, which is on coverage. So what are the different types of greenhouse gases that are being covered in each country's NDCs? So we can see over here that there's actually been quite a significant expansion of the scope of greenhouse gases. Brunei, Laos, Malaysia, and Singapore have added more greenhouse gases. These are less abundant than CO2, but they are more potent. So it's also really useful to include them in the NDC. However, Vietnam has actually removed 2 greenhouse gases from its NDC in the NDC 2.0. So I think that's quite interesting. Maybe it would be good to look into what the reasons for that could be, maybe challenges in terms of monitoring and reporting different greenhouse gases. Okay, so category 3, we're still in category 2. What are the sectors being covered in the NDC? So across the ASEAN countries, it's quite consistent that most countries are covering energy, industry, and many of them have added the agriculture sector in their NDC 2.0. Although some countries have decided to remove the forestry sector, Thailand also removed the land use the land use and forestry sector from its NDC. Thailand is also not actually explicitly listed which sectors it is covering in its NDC. It only specified that it will not include forestry. So that could be an area for greater clarity in the future as well. So, but overall, it's really encouraging to see the increase in sector coverage across the different countries. Okay, so category 3 is on the sectoral non-greenhouse gas targets, right? And there's a few ways of counting this. It could be adding a new one, it could be strengthening an existing one, or it could be advancing the target year for an existing target, or declaring an intent to overachieve an existing target. So over here for Brunei, we saw that Brunei added new targets in the industry and the energy sectors. Cambodia added targets in the waste and energy sectors. Myanmar added 5 targets in energy and forestry and land use. And I also want to talk a bit more about Indonesia here. So Indonesia actually did not add any new sectoral targets in the NDC 2.0. But in the COP26 revisit NDC that was submitted in 2022, there was quite significant changes. So it strengthened 6 sectoral targets, mostly in the agriculture sector. And it also added 16 targets in mainly the energy, waste, and industry sectors. So in many of these cases, Indonesia has actually added more detail into its sectoral targets. So for example, in the past NDC, Indonesia had one general overall target for energy efficiency. But in the latest NDC, it added more specific targets such as the deployment of a certain amount of efficient street lighting. So we are getting more detailed sectoral targets in the new NDC. But one caveat that I had to make here is that some countries, including Indonesia, but also other countries, when they update their NDC, they might sometimes drop old targets and replace them with new ones. And sometimes they don't really explain why certain targets were removed, or how the new targets compare to the old targets. So while there are new targets being added, we also need more information to determine whether it is effectively stronger or weaker or about the same as the previous target. So I would say like these numbers here are a bit of a work in progress and they need a bit more time to look at. Okay, so in category 4, we're looking at actions. So not necessarily a quantitative target here, but these are actions that the countries have stated that they will undertake in their NDCs. So let's see. For Thailand here, yeah, I also want to point out for Thailand, there was no change in its NDC 2.0 as well. But in the latest COP26 NDC, it added one mitigation action, which is that it is now developing its RED Plus program, the REDD Plus program. And then for Cambodia stands out a lot here because it added a lot of policy actions. It has a section in the NDC that is very detailed, and it's divided into sectors and which actions will be taken under each sector with estimated finance costs. So Cambodia's got a very clear communication of the potential mitigation actions that it's looking at, and as well as the financial needs that come with those plans. So I think Cambodia's NDC can be a very useful resource for international partners that are looking to help, Cambodia achieve its conditional targets. And then, yes, for Indonesia as well, the COP26 revisit has added 5 more actions, mostly in the waste and the industry sectors. Similarly, Vietnam, in the COP26 NDC, it added quite a lot of detailed actions that it will take within each sector. So this NDC has provided more examples of actions that it will take. So for example, in energy, the new NDC has mentioned solar water heaters and the use of cleaner fuels for household cooking for the first time. Okay, so that's like kind of a look at how ASEAN countries have taken different forms of ambition enhancement across the 4 categories. And based on our assessment, we think that there are a few overarching trends in the region's strategy for climate ambition enhancement. So at least when we look at between the NDC 1.0 and the 2.0, we find that most countries didn't really strengthen or add new economy-wide targets, but there was very common for countries to increase their sector coverage or their greenhouse gas coverage, which is a very positive sign because we think that this is a sign of stronger mainstreaming of climate change issues within different government sectors. So, climate action is no longer just something that only the environment ministry looks at. It's also something that energy, agriculture, industrial sectors are looking at in setting non-greenhouse gas targets to take climate action. And then, of course, if we look beyond the NDC 2.0 and we see the new COP26 NDCs that came out, those actually also show that there is a gradual strengthening of economy-wide ambition in addition to just sector-based ambition. So that's also an encouraging sign. And then we also think that we can sort of categorize ASEAN countries into a few different categories based on how they approach NDC ambition enhancement. So in our first category, category A, we think that these countries generally make good attempts to increase their economy-wide target and also their sectoral targets, but they have limited coverage in terms of greenhouse gases or sectors. And so these tend to be the lower income countries like Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. And they could really benefit from international assistance, not just in directly assisting their mitigation activities like renewable energy, but also in expanding their capabilities for monitoring and reporting their activities and emissions. So that's really the first step, right? Because with greater monitoring capabilities, they can greater understand their activities and the greenhouse gases released, and that will be the basis for even stronger ambition. And then, of course, now that they've set these targets, they also face the challenge of implementation, and they need to really secure robust financing strategies to meet these targets. So again, international cooperation is really crucial, and I think that their NDCs are good resources for looking at really where these finance needs are. And then for category B, for these countries, they also showed some minimal strengthening of economy-wide targets, as well as strengthening their sectoral targets. But these tend to be higher income countries like Brunei, Singapore, and Vietnam, who are under greater scrutiny to use their resources for stronger action. So, for instance, Brunei and Singapore have the highest GDP per capita, and Vietnam is the third highest emitter in ASEAN. So, these countries kind of face pressure internationally to strengthen their targets. And so Singapore and Vietnam actually did improve their economy-wide targets in their COP26 NDCs, and Singapore also strengthened it even further in the NDC 3.0. So future NDCs can continue down this path and continue to, incorporate new developments in national or sectoral policies. So for example, new power development plans. Vietnam has just released a revision of its Power Development Plan 8, which I believe has quite significant increases in planned renewable capacity. So, and Singapore, on the other hand, is also actively starting new projects for importing more renewable energy. So it would be really interesting to see how these new initiatives can translate to greater climate ambition in the next NDC. So for category C, we applied this to Malaysia and the Philippines, which we can see that they had kind of incremental enhancements in their economy-wide targets, but their NDCs are relatively a bit lacking in detail on the sectoral strategies. So this could be a bit of an obstacle when there's less detail, when you're seeking international assistance or maybe investments from partners. So this doesn't mean that the countries don't have sectoral strategies. So they could be in other national planning documents. For example, Malaysia's National Energy Transition Roadmap came out in 2023, which was after its last NDC was submitted. So this can be something that is more clearly articulated and consolidated into its NDC so that there's really, like a one-stop shop to see where all its sector-based targets are. Okay, so for the last category, so originally we put two countries in this category. They had limited ambition enhancements, and they were Indonesia and Thailand, and this was based on their NDC 2.0. But like I've been mentioning, although the NDC 2.0 was actually not very different from their NDC 1.0, their latest NDC that was submitted after COP26 were actually quite improved. They were strengthened quite significantly in terms of both economy-wide targets and the sectoral targets. So this is also a really good sign. Yeah, so, overall, ASEAN countries, most of them have both conditional and unconditional targets. And usually the conditional targets are stronger than the conditional targets because they are seeking international assistance. And so it may be useful to consolidate more of their plans and actions across sectors to present a more cohesive climate strategy to attract partners. And a stronger NDC is also something that can complement the long-term emission strategy because it focuses more on near-term or middle-term actions. So it would be really useful to increase the clarity of the NDCs here by maybe, incorporating plans from other sectors, other sectoral roadmaps and plans that they might have. Okay, yeah, so this is pretty much the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here.
Thank you, Jiahui, for the very insightful and comprehensive presentation. So I think it is also important to note that every ASEAN member states has committed their commitment to contribute for the net zero target as well as the climate action and adaptation plan that is translated and being translated to the NDC document which shall be submitted by this year. So yeah, so I think we can go to the discussion session for everyone who would like to have a question regarding the session that you just heard just now. You can just type the question in the question and answer box below, and we will answer your question directly through this discussion. Maybe to start with, I have several questions to be asked in terms of your paper and also your recent presentation and update. So maybe we can start by examining about the target of NDC itself. Well, we could say that each country has increased their national ambition, especially the target, and also some even add more sectoral target on it. While at the same time, some countries have not reached the previous target, which creates some gaps about the NDC document. So how do you see this gap? Is it like what should the ASEAN member states really do to enhance their NDC and address this gap of target?
Yeah, okay, so pretty much all of the ASEAN countries have set 2030 targets. So now the question is, are they on track for those targets? And I think this is something that this paper can't answer, but it would be a good topic for another paper. And I think there is a way to assess this gap because we can look at the greenhouse gas inventories which are submitted by parties under the Paris Agreement. For example, there are national communications, which are submitted every 4 years, and the biennial update reports, which are submitted every 2 years. So these are more detailed documents that basically report the country's emissions by sector and also by greenhouse gas. And then we can compare these reports against their target over the years to see if they are really on a trajectory of meeting these targets and achieving that. But one challenge is that not all countries are consistent in submitting these reports. So there might be a lot of missing data as well for these greenhouse gas inventories. Yeah, so that would be something to look into as well.
Yeah. Also, we are in ACE also. We are also in ACE looking for that. I mean, the gap, how to address the gap, and also as well as supporting the member states on maintaining and also shaping their knowledge about the energy and climate. And I think it would be a good topic to discuss more and explore more for the NDC submission in ASEAN region. So I think we have already obtained like several questions here on the question box. So I will start with the question from Professor Indira Overland. The question is, are you aware of any discussion about making the NDCs of the ASEAN countries more similar to each other in terms of targets, measures, base years, etc., to increase regional policy consistency?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I'm not aware if there's any explicit discussion on this, but I know that there have been calls from, various researchers for a regional target. So something that ASEAN can look forward to as a whole. And, although I think a regional target would be really useful for kind of driving more regional initiatives, more regional climate cooperation. There's also quite a lot of challenges. So as we can see, already the ASEAN countries are not consistent in submitting their greenhouse gas inventories. They may submit them at different years, so then we won't have standardized data across years. And then they also have different formats for their targets. Malaysia still has a carbon intensity target, which is quite different and difficult to compare with other ASEAN countries. So that's also something that some researchers, some people are advocating for Malaysia to switch it to a similar, maybe a business as usual target or an absolute emissions target. Yeah, so and then of course there's also the issue of coming to a consensus on how to measure or what would be a fair target for ASEAN as a whole. So yeah, I don't know if there are high level discussions on this, but there's definitely discussions around from researchers and from civil society on the potential for this, although there's a lot of obstacles.
Thank you, Ms. Jiahui, for the answer. I hope it answered Prof. Indra question. And I would also like to add maybe in terms of having more similar targets, measure and base years, it is also depends on the data that the countries have, because some ASEAN countries might not have the similar data as their baseline to set the similar target. So I think before setting up the target and also creating a new database or new measures, it also needs like more capacity building support, maybe from the UNFCCC for ASEAN countries to align the target as well as the measurement. So it would be more easier for us to set up the new target and action plan.
Just to jump in again. Yeah, I think another thing that ASEAN countries need to come to an agreement on is the coverage, right? So we saw that there's different greenhouse gases being covered and also different sectors being covered. So I think maybe, although it might be difficult to align all NDCs or to have like one single regional target, maybe one low-hanging fruit would be to have shared sectoral targets, which we already have for energy, right? We have a shared renewable energy and energy efficiency target. So that could be something that could be considered in other sectors as well. And it will kind of sidestep the problems with, coming to a consensus on coverage and all that.
Okay, I hope this the answer answered your question, Prof. Indra. So we can go to the next question from Tessa Wong. Countries with conditional targets require external assistance, including some funding from international development partners. Do you feel the involvement of development partners would help or hinder progress on this?
Yeah, so I believe that development partners will play quite an important role in this region. I believe, if I remember correctly, development partners are already involved in helping some ASEAN countries actually develop their NDCs in the first place. So they are helping countries like maybe Cambodia and Laos to enhance their monitoring capabilities and to really have the resources, both the resources and the expertise to do the work and figure out what targets make sense for them and what sector-based actions they can take. So I think they're already contributing quite a lot in this region, both in terms of providing expertise as well as maybe in terms of multilateral development banks providing a lower, like finance with lower barriers for taking mitigation actions.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tessa, for the question, and I hope the answer from Ms. Jiahui can support support your answer. So can we go to the next question from Kuratul Ainchima? I want to inquire one thing. Do we have any proper MRV system to track the progress for net zero update?
So, okay, for MRV, I think the closest that we have to a globally standardized MRV system would be the UNFCCC reporting framework. So this was established, back in the 90s, and countries have been submitting their biennial update reports with their greenhouse gas inventories that follow a specific template that was agreed upon by countries. And then recently, the enhanced transparency framework has come into effect. So under this new framework, there will be an improved reporting mechanism, which is also standardized. And so countries will then begin to follow this standardized framework for reporting their emissions as well. And, because of this, that's why we have actually pretty good data on emissions all the way back to 1992, because that's when countries started submitting their data under the standard template.
Okay, just to emphasize that MRP is also important in terms of tracking the progress of each ASEAN countries, and also the UNFCCC has provided some monitoring scheme by submitting the reports such as the biannual report and also the enhanced transparency report to support the monitoring and tracking the progress of the NDC submission. So I think we can go to the next question from Ms. Rusmi Wiyati. So who are the significant actors claimed or expected to partner with these ASEAN governments? How's the status of communities or public contributions?
Yeah, so in general, when countries talk about their conditional targets, they're talking about receiving assistance from the other developed country parties in the Paris Agreement. Though of course, I think increasingly we are looking at different modalities for providing finance to countries to support their climate action, right? So not just in terms of public finance from developed countries. I mean, last year they agreed on the new collective goal on finance, which is about 300 billion coming from public finance from developed countries, and then a bigger total amount of 1.3 trillion coming from all sources, including private sector or other public-private collaboration. So we can see that there's kind of a shift in expectations, right? Where we kind of know that public finance is, although it's very, very important, we are expecting to see more contributions from private finance or from new solutions like blended finance. And then, of course, multilateral development banks will also play an increasing role as well. Yeah.
Yes, I am agree with Ms. Jiahui. The climate finance is also super important to support the activities related to climate adaptation and mitigation plan in ASEAN countries. And also maybe we can continue to the next question from Muhammad Nasiruddin. So to what extent are Brunei's sectoral approaches such as in energy, transport, and industry aligned with its overall climate ambition? And how can this be harmonized to support the more consistent regional cooperation, like aligning or shared sectoral targets in other sectors?
Sorry, I didn't catch the beginning. So you're talking about how progress in individual sectors is contributing to overall progress, is that correct? Sorry, I didn't quite catch the full question there.
Maybe Mr. Muhammad Nasiruddin would like to turn on the microphone.
Sorry, it's all right. I can see the question here.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Brunei specifically, right? Brunei sectoral
Yeah,
approaches.
yes.
Yeah, I'm not very familiar on specifically the details of Brunei's sectoral approaches, but if we look at Brunei's national climate change strategy, it does focus a lot on energy and industry. So for industry, I believe its main strategy is to minimize methane emissions, and it's also planning to deploy more renewable energy. And how can it be aligned with? Yeah, so I do think that these sectoral actions could be strengthened, especially in terms of methane. There could be a lot of potential for Brunei to take methane abatement measures in the oil and gas sector, not just in terms of preventing like preventable flaring, but also looking into leak detection or upgrading its facilities to be more leak resistant, and also looking into methane capture. So that could be something that could strengthen Brunei's approach if we are looking at the industry and energy sector.
Yeah, actually, I just want to add some information about Brunei. So Brunei has their own Brunei Climate Change Secretariat, which is responsible to set and also collect and also assess the Brunei's or national climate change target for Brunei Darussalam. In addition, we in ASEAN environment also will have the ASEAN Center for Climate Change, which will be in Brunei. And in this center, they will set like the regional plan and also target for climate change mitigation and adaptation that will further adjusted for each ASEAN member states, as well as its detail of climate mitigation and adaptation plan for regional perspectives. So yeah, I think for regional and national, for Brunei Darussalam in national, the target and indicators for each sectoral will be handled by the Brunei Climate Change Secretariat. And for more regional view, it will be handled by the ASEAN Center for Climate Change, which will located in Brunei Darussalam. So I hope this support the question. And I think Miss Tessa Wong raised her hand. Miss Tessa, would you like to ask more questions? Yes. Can you check your mic?
Yes. Can
Okay.
you hear me? Thanks, Jiahui, for the presentation. Actually, there was an accident that I raised my hand. But actually, I really appreciated your response to my question on the involvement of international development partners. My kind of perspective for asking this question is because it is true. I think in Cambodia, for example, UNDP and some other development partners are working with local government to drive climate change through various policies or interventions. I think my question was more on is it normally easier? It looks good on paper when you have, let's say, development partners contributing funding, but in practice, is it a bit difficult in terms of working with the local government, right? In terms of like dynamics or getting things done, etc., etc. So I think that was a bit more my where I was coming from. But yeah, just in case anyone has anything to add, happy to hear what you think. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe one thing that comes to mind when it comes to working with development partners is sometimes there are barriers or delays caused by things like requirements for environmental impact assessments or social impact assessments that can take a long time and take up a lot of, I guess, resources. And usually this is something that maybe people see as a bit of causing a delay because it takes up more time. And they might be, they might prefer to access finance through other ways through the private sector, especially when it comes to things like energy, where it's sort of more attractive to private sector investments. But I think the international development partners are still really, really important because there are a lot of projects out there that are maybe not as bankable yet, especially when you look at adaptation projects. So I think this is an area where they can really step in and not just provide their expertise, but also kind of put in that first investment to help build capacity within that country.
Thank you, Jiahui, for the answer, and I hope it explains more about Ms. Tessa's question. So I think we have another question here from Mirza. What is the current role of the civil society and subnational actors in Southeast Asia in meeting the NDC targets?
Okay.
Yeah, so I think civil society does play an important role. We are thinking about civil society, including academia and also NGOs, as well as activists. I think they kind of provide they can provide a link between sort of governments and affected groups. So for example, civil society and NGOs, they often work on the ground and they are more in tune with local situations and local context. And they are often often important partners when it comes to uh, implementing projects on the ground at a local level. And for subnational actors, cities are definitely, cities and also maybe subnational governments like states are definitely really important. We often look to them as, potential potential climate leaders who could be more ambitious than actually the national target. So, one example in the US is California is seen as a climate leader. It has made much faster progress and it has made stronger ambition in taking climate action. And similarly in Southeast Asia, certain states that have greater renewable energy capacity can really take the lead in an energy transition. So one example could be Sarawak, which is like which really intends to take a leadership role in not just renewable energy development, but also just green economy development in general. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the answer. So I think since we still have little time, so maybe I can ask one question from my side. It's about your category one, where you highlight like 3 points that is considered as strengthening the economy wide, which is like setting up new target, strengthening an existing target, changing the type of an existing target. In that way, how do you define strengthening? Does increasing target is also categorized as a strengthening effort of ASEAN member states, or do you have any other measurement to define the strengthened effort for ASEAN member states?
Yeah, so the three types of strengthening that you mentioned, maybe I'll just go through them first. So the first one is setting a new target, right? And this one is quite straightforward. It refers to maybe setting a new conditional or unconditional target. So this is something that the Philippines has done. It set a new unconditional target. And recently Singapore has set a new 2035 target, which it didn't have previously. And for the second one, it is strengthening an existing target. So usually this means increasing the amount of emissions that it plans to reduce by the same target year. Or maybe some countries could say that they have decided to move forward the target year of an existing emissions target. And then the last one is changing the type of an existing target. So this is something that Singapore has actually done. So one example is that Singapore used to have an emissions intensity target like Malaysia. So it was based on GDP as well. And then in its later NDCs, Singapore converted it into an absolute emissions target. And we consider that to be a strengthening of the target as well, because it adds more clarity and accountability. It's just easier to monitor an absolute emissions target. And so if Malaysia, some researchers might also advocate for Malaysia to do the same thing and move away from an emissions intensity target. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, it answered my question. Thank you very much. And I think we have one last question from Mr. Da Cruz here. So, what is the role of ASEAN regional cooperation in promoting the harmonization and enhancement of climate ambition among its member countries?
ASEAN major corporations, is that correct?
Regional cooperation, yeah.
Corporations. Yeah, they definitely play a huge role. Like as we mentioned earlier, we're starting to hope to see more contributions from the private sector into providing climate finance and supporting, green economy development. And, we can actually see that when we have more commitments of finance globally, that could be something that motivates countries to increase their ambition, because then they can be more confident that they can receive the international assistance needed for their conditional targets. So I think one example would be like the Just Energy Transition Partnership. This is not exactly a corporation, but it's an example of how when you have like credible and clear commitments of finance, it can really encourage the country to set new targets that it didn't have before. So under the JETP, for example, Indonesia had set new targets for coal phase out that were not present in the previous NDC. So similarly, if we have more regional corporations stepping up and maybe setting their own net zero targets, then that's a very strong signal that, you know, countries need to provide, or it's a strong signal that countries can expect more collaborations on climate finance with the private sector. Or if corporations have their own renewable energy targets, for example, if they are in the RE100, then they know that, you know, these companies will be a source of demand for renewable energy, and this gives them greater certainty to make stronger plans for renewable energy deployment. So yeah, really, really huge goals.
Yes, and I also would like to add, so basically ASEAN has already published the ASEAN Strategy for Carbon Neutrality document. So it is basically it has 8 strategies for ASEAN that need to be prioritized to achieve the carbon neutrality in 2050, if I'm not mistaken. So I think the document also approve of the regional cooperation between the member states and to prove the commitment to reduce the greenhouse gas emission and also align with their NDC document. I hope this helps and also if this answered your question. So I think since we have already it's almost 3 o'clock. I think I need to close this session, and thank you very much, Ms. Jiahui, for your insightful discussion and also presentation. And I would like to also thank for all the audience that has been attending this webinar until the end. And please wait for the next ARNECC paper talks, and we will share the information through Accept social media. So I can go back to Putri.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Indira, for moderating the discussion. And thank you very much, Ms. Jiahui, for the insights shared today in regards of examining climate ambition enhancement in ASEAN countries' nationally determined contributions. Moving on, the next agenda would be a photo session between our speaker, Ms. Jiahui, and moderator, Ms. Indira. To both the speaker as well as the moderator, please be ready and give your biggest smile to the camera. I will now lead the countdown. 3, 2, 1. Perfect. One more time. 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Jiahui Q and Ms. Indira, for your time. Once again, thank you for lending your precious time to share your comprehensive review on the enhancement of ASEAN countries' climate ambitions under their NDC. And I would like to mention that as previously mentioned by Ms. Jiahui, NDCs differ in each ASEAN member states, and however, in order to achieve the Paris Agreement goal, it is really crucial for us to think about ways for countries to be able to achieve their targets. And in this matter, ASEAN member states have largely focused on increasing mitigation coverage and non-GHG targets rather than strengthening economy-wide targets. However, economy-wide ambition is gradually strengthening. And also, for the next years, throughout the next years, first, ASEAN countries must further enhance climate ambition and improve how they communicate current efforts and actions to the public. And finally, this event has approached its end. Thank you everyone for attending as well as for the questions. We hope that this discussion can provide insights for everyone. And we will see you again in the next episode of ARNECC Paper Talks, because ARNECC Paper Talks will be held monthly, in which we hope to see you again in June. So please stay tuned to our social medias, newsletter, and website to obtain more information in regards of ARNECC Paper Talks, as well as all things net zero in Southeast Asia. As the Master of Ceremony, I, Haningrom Eka Putri Rahayu, would like to thank everyone for taking part in the ARNECC Paper Talks. Goodbye and have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much.